Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome everybody to our third HR webinar in our Restart Ohio webinar series. Today we're going to talk about performance management. My name is Joanna Forbes of Forbes Human Resources, a local HR consulting and workplace training organization. First, I'd like to thank our sponsors for today's webinar, the Ohio Small Business Development Center and Export Assistance Network, located at Youngstown State University in the Williamson College of Business Administration. Just some housekeeping items for today. This will be in a presentation format. If you have any questions at any point during the webinar, please put them in the chat box and we will address them at the end. Anything we don't get to today, I will be sure to reach out personally to anybody that sends anything in. Everybody's audio will be muted today. This will be recorded and put on the website of the Small Business Development Center. That is also where you can find the other webinars that we have done in this series and other series that they put on. This presentation will be emailed to everybody today in a PDF format. So don't feel like you need to write everything down that you're seeing on the screen today. You will get a copy of everything that you see today. Just a short disclaimer before we get started. This webinar is for informational purposes only. So the information is current as of today's date. Please refer to all the referenced websites that I'll mention and that are located at the end of the presentation. And of course, all of your business industry standards for your current information. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk about our agenda real quick. What are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about performance management, what it is, communication, orientation and onboarding, of course, performance appraisals, goal setting, corrective action, and just some final reminders. So before we get started, I just want everyone to kind of think about today because we are living in such a different time. Our workplace is completely different than where it was a year ago, even 6 months ago when everything started happening. So I just want you to think about how your workplace changed. For those of you on the call that are business owners, all of the policies that you had to put in, the managers on the call today, how you had to manage the performance of your employees differently. So what policies are changing, what policies will stay in place, and what's going to go back to normal if we ever do get back to normal. And the big word that we're hearing right now all over the place with our employees, whether we're business owners or managers or any sort of leader in our organization, is the word empathy. We're hearing that word a lot. So our main goal was just putting that confidence back into our employees that we have their best interest at heart, their safety at heart. So why is performance management so important? So let's talk about pre-COVID world, post-COVID world, any world. Why is this so important? Well, the main reason is we have to manage our employees to ensure that our goals and our objectives are being met at our organization. We want to reach our goals effectively and efficiently. And we all know, because we've all hired people, and unfortunately some of us on the call have probably fired people, then in order to have that successful business, we have to manage our employees efficiently. We work so hard to make sure our business are successful, especially those of us on the call that are maybe small business owners. We work really hard for that. So this is a crucial part that we have to make sure that we do effectively. It keeps our employees, the quality employees there. We want to keep our retention rates high and our turnover rates low. So that's why this is so important. It all leads to that success of our business. So we want to have successful employees, not just for the dollars, but because we want them engaged and we want them happy. We want to have a happy workplace. So what does a successful employee look like? Well, in order for an employee to be successful, here's an example diagram. We want that success. So when we hire employees, they come to us with that aptitude, right? We interviewed them, we saw their resumes, they came to us with the knowledge, the skills, the ability, the talent. That's why we hired them. Now let's look at that circle at the bottom. So we come to the table with the support, with the equipment, with the tools that they need, the time that they need to successfully do their job. So that's what we have to bring to the table. So, and I always remind managers whenever I'm talking to managers and helping them with any employee issues, you can't force employees to be motivated. And I know some of you on the call today are thinking, yes, that is absolutely true. You may bring all the support, all the equipment, all the time, everything that they need to do, but to be motivated is something that they have to choose to be. They have to have that attitude, that confidence, that focus, and that drive. So this combination that we're seeing on the screen today are all the things that we need to have that successful employee. So you chose the employees based on their aptitude, and now you're bringing the resources, and hopefully we can have that success. So just a little bit of practical information before we dig in. You know, I say rules of performance management, but these are always my rules, my HR 101 rules. I do a lot of HR workplace trainings, and I always just remind people, these are very simple. Be consistent and document everything. So those are our two rules of performance management. We're going to talk about performance management a little bit of a peripheral level, but the reality is that we really do need to continue to cross our T's and dot our I's. COVID world or non-COVID world, that does not matter. So what all do we have in our performance management? Sometimes we think performance management, we think performance reviews, but that's just one piece of the pie. It's the performance planning, it's that goal setting for our employees, and a lot of it is just that day-to-day ongoing coaching right there in the workplace. So all of this together is part of our performance management program, or really just our performance management philosophy, really. So that is everything that we have to think about when we think about performance management, not just those pesky performance reviews that nobody likes to do, which we are going to talk about today. So I just want everyone to kind of have a visual, you know, of performance management throughout the employment cycle. So this is the employment cycle, and sometimes for those of us who maybe have some high turnover positions at our place of work, we feel like we're always on this loop. We need staff up there in the top left, that blue bubble, recruit, we're screening, we're hiring, we're training, and we're managing them. And then before we know it, employment ends again, and we're on this Ferris wheel of this employment cycle. So we're going to talk about performance management at a little bit of the orientation level and that management performance. In the perfect world, we would stay in that arrow between manage and employment ends for a very, very long time because we have low turnover and high retention. And that's really the goal there, right, is to stay in that arrow for a very long time. But that's not always the reality. So we just need to think about what we need to do to ensure that we can extend that arrow as long as we can. So before we even get started on that, the first thing we need to talk about is communication, because this is the most crucial part of your performance management program, philosophy, whatever it is that you want to call it, how you manage the performance of your employees. And let's think about communication, not just formally, not when there's a formal statement that's coming out, but also that informal communication that's that day-to-day. And we're going to talk about coaching here in a minute. So when we're talking about something like, I need everybody to start at 6 o'clock now, you know, that's something that could be a quick communication, but also could be miscommunicated. Did he or she say this week, today, just till COVID's over? You know, these are all kinds of communications that we're living through right now. Or something more formal as we're merging with another company. We got bought out. We're acquiring somebody. So those are more formal communications that will happen on the workplace. But there's some basic rules of communication that it doesn't matter how formal or how informal the communication still needs to be there for your employees. So just some reminders about communication, and I'm sure you've seen these things before, but just reminders that communication is a two-way process. We're not just talking at our employees when we're helping to manage their performance, you know, and we do need to be clear and concise and use the medium that best suits. All industries are different, whether you work in a food service industry, an office environment, a manufacturing environment, everything is different. All employees are different. And we can't assume that the message needs to be the same for everybody. You know, we keep our employees in the loop as needed, and we're going to talk about during organizational change here in a second. And of course, adapting your communications to your organization's culture is so important. Now, right now, we're living in a totally different world where everything's online. Remote workforce, online, remote workforce. Those are the two terms we keep hearing so much. So things may have changed a lot for some of your employees. But for some industries, it did not. Manufacturing, food service, healthcare, some of those things, those essential workers still needed to go in and do their jobs. So the communication may not have changed as much. So organizational change is one of the most crucial times to have effective communication. And if we did not know that before, we certainly know it now, because we are living right now in a prime example of organizational change. I'm sure you had policies change, regulations change, procedures change. Just how your employees walk into the door for their start of workday has changed, I'm sure. So this is a crucial time to over communicate. You can never over communicate too much during a time of organizational change, and that's what we're living in right now. So what happens if we don't communicate a lot? And again, we are seeing this. We're seeing numbers on the news, people who aren't going back to work, disengaged employees, misunderstandings. Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of lawsuits all over our country of employees against their employers for unsafe work conditions. And a lot of it could have just been misunderstandings and ineffective communications, because that does lead to damaged relationships and broken trust, and ultimately even sometimes anger and hostility. So this part is so important in your performance management. And again, it ultimately leads to that employee turnover, which, as we know, costs a lot of money. Now, if we have that effective communication, of course, we have morale is up, satisfaction and engagement is up. We know this. We want our employees to understand what's going on at the workplace, for sure, especially times right now in this pandemic that we're living in. It is so important. We do not want to draw hard lines in the sand right now and not allow our employees to have some sort of voice to talk about their concerns or anything that they may need, they're confused about, or they don't understand why something's changing. It is so important that we have that effective communication right now. And again, improves the processes and procedures. So anytime we're keeping communication open, improving those processes and procedures, creates a greater efficiency and reduces cost. And we hate to always talk about the bottom line, but that's the reality of it, of how it ultimately affects at the end. Again, back to what I talked about in the beginning, the term empathy. We're hearing that so much during what's happening right now with our employees. We have employees that are dealing with issues and concerns related to COVID, whether they've been affected personally, whether they know somebody, whether it's because all the uncertainty around childcare, schools, sports, anything. We have a lot of employees going through different things right now. So this is, again, a piece of the pie of that communication is the listening. And we all know, how to be a good listener. We have said have our listening ears on since kindergarten, but just some reminders here that we really do need to make a decision to listen, and not just that pretend listening, which I know we've all done from time to time. Not interrupting people, being focused on people, and again, exhibiting that sincere empathy when it comes to listening and communicating with our employees right now. So just some of the other nonverbals, again, we've all seen these before in any sort of communication classes that we've taken, but just some reminders right now, again, because it is so important right now in our communication that we're exhibiting that empathy and we're really listening to our employees. And we're a little bit mindful of some of these things more so than usual. Now, if we are in a remote workforce, we can still usually see our faces on a Zoom call or whatever platform we're using for that. So again, still important. And on the opposite of that, if communication now is more written and email, very important that we look at that email. I'm sure we all on the call have examples of how emails have gone awry and been read differently than they were supposed to be. So again, reminders on those as well. So let's look back at our employment cycle here, because we're going to talk about orientation and onboarding and what that actually means for our performance management. So we're down there in the green circle on the bottom right. We've hired our employees, we screened them, and now we're going to start bringing them on board. So the first thing I want to say is I always like to remind business owners and managers who I assist with is to connect your new employees' job functions to your company mission immediately. I feel this is very, very important. Whether you're hiring a CEO or an afternoon shift environmental services aide, the front desk clerk, it does not matter, because everybody's job functions ultimately lead to that company mission, and they should really understand why. It makes them connected to the job. It makes them understand that their job is important no matter what that role is, because they are. And it really lets them see the bigger picture of the organization. It's so important when all employees at an organization understand what is ultimately happening and how they're contributing to that. It's so important. So I just want you to think about for a minute, how do your employees learn that mission? How do they know it? Is it hanging on the wall, or is it given to them on their first day? It's just important that you think about that. And if you are telling them that is great. If not, just something to think about. So we have our employees and they come on board for that first day, and they're usually enthusiastic, hopefully, right? So we want to have some sort of orientation that's planned out, because a poorly planned one, or one that doesn't exist, usually, again, leads to turnover. There's nothing worse than a new employee showing up for their first day ready to work for you, and we don't have anything ready for them. We don't have their tools ready for them, whatever those tools are. We don't have a space for them. We don't have a trainer for them. So we want to make sure we have this planned and ready to go. We've all seen statistics that when we lose an employee, it's cost 1.5 to 2.5 times their annual salary. So we want to make sure that we get a good start for these employees right off the bat. Think back to that diagram that we showed in the beginning with success. We need to bring the time and the resources. They came to us with the aptitude. So just a little bit about orientation and onboarding. We see sometimes these terms used interchangeably, but really they're not. That orientation, that's that first day usually, that's that initial exposure, that's the paperwork, the housekeeping items, introducing them to people, getting them up and running, all of those things. So that's why it's so important. And as employee engagement became more of a hot topic, these last 15 years, I would say, we hear more about that employee engagement. Now it's just part of it. We talk about it all the time. We realize that we need to stay connected to those employees past that first day. We really need to have something that goes beyond that orientation, and depending on the position can last for quite a long time, 6 months up to 2 years, really, if it's a position of somebody that's in a succession plan or at a higher level. So this is the training and the engagement process, again, that links the person to the organization and really makes it clear what their job functions are. So it can include training and development plans, professional development, part of a succession plan. It really goes on and on. The key is that you're continually reaching back to that employee and making sure that they're not lost in the sauce somewhere, and that they are still engaged and connected to the organization. So just think about, for your orientation program, how will we plan to make the employee feel welcome? How are they clear about their job expectations? If you have job descriptions, I'm sure you do, that's part of it as well. What all are the things that they need to get, that they need to sign off on? And again, how will we know that they're aware of the mission and what is their part in that mission? This is all part of starting that performance management off on the right foot. So just some do's and don'ts, make sure we have a good plan, make sure we introduce our employees to other staff. We'll talk about COVID world here in a second. Set those immediate goals and expectations. We're going to talk about performance appraisals here at the end, but just a reminder, some people have that 90-day orientation checkoff list, things like that, so they're well aware of what your expectations are. Making them feel welcome, of course. We want to give a good first impression. So again, don't confuse orientation with onboarding. It needs to be longer than just that one-day paperwork day. Don't drown them with all of the information at once. Spread it out if you can. And again, asking for feedback. Again, how was your orientation experience? How was your onboarding experience? We need to know, what we're doing. If we start to see trends where we're losing employees in those first 90 days to 6 months, then there's probably a piece of this orientation and onboarding that can be probably improved just a bit. And again, in our COVID world, what are we doing right now? We have some virtual onboarding going on right now, possibly at some of the workplaces on the call today. So we still want to have those face-to-face introductions, again, Zoom, Skype, whatever platform we're using. Mail those goodies out. If you're giving people cups and pens and mouse pads, if we're still using those, t-shirts, whatever the goodies are that they typically get when they start, still send those out to folks if they're working from home. Streamline the paperwork. A lot of times we use an HRIS system or a payroll system for our paperwork, but we want to make sure that the process isn't overwhelming. We don't want to send, 10 to 12 different emails with, different PDF attachments. Some things a PDF, some things a Word document, some things are online. Try to make sure all of that new hire paperwork is streamlined a bit for that employee. Don't skip out on the culture of the organization. We're seeing a lot of things right now about virtual happy hours and things like that. And while that may not be part of your culture per se, the point of that is if there are some, quote, fun things that the organization is doing to keep in touch, include these new employees in that. And most importantly, stay in touch. Again, because it's so difficult when we're in this remote workforce world, as we hire a new employee and we pull out all the stops those first couple of days, and then everybody is back, sitting at their home office working. So again, we want to reach out to that new employee for sure. They're out there maybe all on their own working. And when it is time for us to all go back into the office, if we haven't already, remember, this person hasn't worked there yet. So we want to reacclimate them when it's time to get back into that office. And just some reminders about training employees. Of course, this picture is from a pre-COVID world, but we just need to remember that it's not a one-size-all approach when it comes to training employees, whether this is in the beginning or whether this is ongoing. A lot of times we miss the mark with trainings, and we really need to get feedback on that and make sure that whether it's a hands-on, whether some people say, just give me the document on it, I'll read it and try it myself. Everybody is different. So this is just a little reminder that when it comes to training employees, that we have to just approach each employee differently. Again, this all comes back to retention. We're losing those employees right from the beginning, and this will help with that for sure. So let's talk about coaching, because this is the day-to-day hands-on. This is so important because this is where we're doing it all the time from the beginning when an employee is first starting with us all the way until an employee parts ways with us. So this is an important, crucial piece of performance management. Coaching is expected for supervisors. Coaching should not be confused. It's not career counseling. It's not mentoring. It's not performance reviews. It is truly that day-to-day, hands-on process. And again, if we're in a remote workforce, it's reaching out, of helping our employees to recognize opportunities to improve their performance. It's walking through and looking at our employees and correcting and helping them. So this is so important. This is a crucial part of performance management that sometimes that we don't think about and we take for granted, but this is very important. This walkthrough and this coaching, the day-to-day hands-on of assisting our employees to making sure they're successful. So it's not performance reviews and it's not disciplinary matters. It's not just, it's not, not coming around until something's wrong. It is both. It is when something's maybe needs fixed and to give praise. So it's both of those things. So, and it's not, again, we're going to talk about those pesky performance reviews here at the end. So communication in coaching, when you're walking through, when you're talking to your employees, we want to make sure, again, they're engaged and they're successful. And this is part of that. This should be an expectation for all of your managers. They're using questions, they're prompting discussions, they're talking about the progress that the employees are making sure your learner understands what they're supposed to do, looking for the good points to reinforce. Again, this isn't just the negative. We hear a lot when employees are dissatisfied at work. You hear a lot, I don't hear from my manager unless it's something bad or something wrong. I don't hear, I made one mistake in 6 years. I never heard from him or her until that one mistake. So that's not effective coaching, right? So it's coming on from both sides of it. Clarifying any next steps for those employees, and just make it clear that you're supporting them and you're looking forward to, seeing them grow, that you're happy for them. All of these things seem simple, but it really keeps that employee engaged. So I'm not one to give out steps in a webinar and tell anybody they need to memorize this, but I just think this is a good diagram just to see, because unfortunately, it's not always positive, right? It is, we do have to discuss those performance problems. And as an HR person, I'm always the one that says we need to document this and have our T's crossed and our I's dotted. And that's why it's crucial that when we're discussing performance problems, that we do that properly. So we want to have standards. We have to have some sort of standards. Now, they may be official SOPs, but they may just be, a task breakdown that sometimes we call it, or just simply instructions, or simply a job description at times. So we want to compare the performance of our employees to those standards, whatever they are. And then find those gaps. Again, this is all part of your documentation. What are the gaps between what they're doing and what they're supposed to do? What's the reason for that gap? Was there a lack of training? Again, think back to our training. Think back to the orientation and the onboarding. Was there a lack of skill or knowledge from the beginning? A lack of resources? Is there some more tools this employee needs? And then we need to correct it. Whether we demonstrate it, whether they have a retraining, we need to make sure that that performance is corrected. And then we have to monitor that employee behavior doing that task. And that's where your coaching comes back in. It's that day-to-day hands-on. And then unfortunately, sometimes that leads to step 6. If that performance is not corrected, sometimes, unfortunately, we do have to move on to further disciplinary, or what we call corrective action, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. So this is a simple 6 steps, but again, it protects you as the manager, protects the employer to show that you adequately walked an employee through correcting their performance problem. And again, when you are giving that feedback, we want to make sure it's private, it's balanced, again, not always negative. It's relevant to the situation and specific, and there's that word document again. We want to make sure it's documented, and we want to make sure it's personal to the person. If you're sitting down with an employee and you're talking to them about their performance problems, it should not be a general, everybody is doing this. It needs to be specific to exactly what's going on with that employee. So let's talk about those performance evaluations. We can't talk about performance management without talking about the performance evaluations. It seems like no one likes to give them and no one likes to receive them. And for anybody on the call today that maybe works in HR, I'm sure you've heard people groaning about them to you as well. But we all know they serve a purpose. A lot of times they're tied to the annual wage increases, so that is one reason that we have to do them. But it really gives employees a time to sit down one-on-one, especially if you're extremely busy and you don't have that time often. This right here does give you that time for that one-on-one conversation. So just a little, like, what's the difference? Okay, we have performance appraisals, which we also sometimes call performance evaluations or performance reviews. All three of those terms are interchangeable. So what's the difference between a performance appraisal and performance management, which we've been talking about this whole time? Well, an appraisal, that's just a one-time, typically annual event. It's an actual meeting, or it's a sit down or stand up meeting, whatever you prefer. It's usually retrospective. Let's talk about how this past year went. And you're usually literally completing some sort of form, whether it's a hard copy form or online. Whereas performance management is that coaching, it's that ongoing, it's all the parts of this. It's that diagram we talked about in the beginning. It's not, always formal. It could be on the fly. A lot of times it's prospective. We're talking about the goals that we can do, things we can learn. And it's about making daily ongoing process. So I always like to tell managers, performance review meetings are not a time for bad surprises. There should not be new news in a performance review. If you've done your ongoing coaching the whole year through, when an employee sits down for you for a performance review meeting, that is not the time to list all of their performance issues or all of their failures through the past year. That is not the time for this, because that should have been dealt with, again, daily with our coaching. Now, good surprises are fine. Maybe you're using this time to announce to an employee that they're getting a promotion or they're getting some sort of raise or their job's, changing in a good way. But there should not really be new news during our performance review. When we're planning for those appraisals, this is an opportunity to review the performance, talk about lessons learned, evaluate the progress, and then really we're establishing goals for the next year. We're doing all of those things during a performance review. So we really want to make sure that we plan beforehand as well as a manager or a supervisor. So what do we need to do? Well, here's just some quick tips. Make sure that you're prepared to discuss the full range of issues that may come up, not just what you want to talk about, right? They may have something that you think that they're going to bring up. So be prepared to discuss that. If this isn't a time when an employee sits down with you and maybe has some criticism about the job, about the workplace, about the management, about their lack of resources, about the schedule, all of these things may come up. Accept it and move on. This is not a time to be defensive or to start arguing about those things. And of course, always be respectful of your employees' time. No cell phones, no emails, all of those things should be turned off. This should really be a one-on-one time with that employee. Again, this may be the only time that you have that one-on-one meeting with that employee. So let's talk about goals for a second, because this is very important in performance management. So goals, they're forward facing and they provide you and your employees with the direction that you want them to go. That's ultimately helping them and helping the business. I'm sure that a lot of you on the call today have seen this before. This is an oldie but goodie, the SMART goal criteria. But this is just a great reminder of how to accurately hold employees accountable in their performance. And again, this keeps things consistent. This protects the employer. When you have specific measurable goals that you're measuring your employees' performance on, and we're not willy-nilly making things up as we go. So again, protects the employer. So, sometimes I'll tell managers, you can even put this on the review if that will help you, especially small businesses where the performance review may just very well be a Word document or a Google Doc or something. Throw this on there because this is a great reminder. And if you're new to setting goals, you can look right on here and say, okay, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-centered. So for example, you tell your employee, now I need you to do some continuing education on this over the next year. Okay, that's a goal, but is it a SMART goal? I need you to have some continuing education. So let's just make it a SMART goal. I need you to take, I would like you to take, you agree with your employee to take 2 1-hour classes, webinars on social media marketing before their next performance review or by the end of the year. So it's specific, it's measurable, it's relevant, and it's time-centered. So that way, if these things don't happen with your employees, you can go right back and say, here's what we agreed on, not just continuing education at some point. So that's a very, very simple example. Again, this is an oldie but goodie, but I like it. I use it. Again, it protects everybody involved. So why do we need these goals in performance management? Again, you want to show that your employees are making progress. It allows that ongoing coaching and that correcting. It's so important. And if you have an objective that's measurable, again, there is your tangible evidence of the completion of an objective. So it is objective. This is an objective process. It also reminds you as the employer or the manager that you need to fully commit to providing those resources in order to do those jobs. If part of their performance review is to take a class, well, then you need to commit to that person, being away from the workplace during that time or closing their door during that time. So that's why all of these things are so important in performance management. So just some reminders, align those goals with the organization's business plan. Mutually agreed upon goals, not forced upon goals, right? Hopefully not. Communicate changes. Things may change. So many things have changed in our workplace over the last 6 months. There were a lot of goals that were redirected and either completely eliminated for the year, postponed for a year, and then changed. Establish those milestone review dates. We want to check in. Again, there should not be new news at the performance review if we're doing that ongoing coaching of their performance. Okay, so let's talk about corrective action and progressive discipline. Unfortunately, sometimes in performance management, it will lead to corrective action or what we call sometimes progressive discipline. So again, if we look at our circle, we try to stay in that bluish green arrow between manage and employment ends for as long as we can. But sometimes we do have to go to employment ends, whether it's the employee's choice or the employer's choice. So just some principles of disciplinary action, which we typically call corrective action too as well. You see these two terms. For those of you on the call today that maybe aren't in human resources, you may be thinking, what's the difference? There really isn't a difference. The whole point of disciplinary action, we like to call corrective action because we're literally trying to correct the actions of our employees. We're trying to coach them into the proper actions. So some principles of disciplinary action is to make sure this discipline's actually the appropriate tool that we need. Think about it. Did we coach them? Have we talked to them yet? Has there even been a conversation about what's happening? Be precise regarding the reasons for your corrective action and your future expectations, which again, that's that documentation. Maintain a professional manager. This is a confidential, typically uncomfortable conversation, and it's between you and your employee. And if you have an HR person at your workplace, the HR person. Keep the criticism free of non-work related manners. Be unemotional. This is a work-related decision. So just a little bit of what progressive discipline is. It's a series of corrective actions. Again, we're trying to correct the actions of our employees and their performance because we are trying to assist them in improving their performance. Corrective action or discipline is not to look to terminate somebody. We want to keep employees. We want to retain employees. So the whole philosophy behind progressive discipline is to try to actually correct the behavior of the employees. We want to minimize misunderstandings. We want to give employee, evidence to what was unacceptable, what they need to work on, the guidelines to improve, and give them an opportunity to do so. We want to reduce the situations that actually result in terminations. Terminations, again, is not our goal. And of course, documentation. We want to document everything along the way for sure. So here are some common steps in progressive discipline. I know you've all seen these before. This is typically what a policy looks like. We usually have an oral, verbal warning, a written warning, some sort of suspension, or maybe possibly a probation, and then a termination. This is a typical progressive discipline that we have in policies. A lot of times we can do performance improvement plans. This is, for an employee that maybe is in performance or disciplinary action or performance improvements, we will put them on an actual plan. This is a written document where we give clear-cut objectives and expectations. Think back to the SMART goals. Include timeframes. Include what you expect of them. Include what the results will be. And then, of course, include consequence of not performing such action, which is typically further corrective action up to and including termination. Again, when we have wrongful discharge claims in the workplace, the things that our attorneys will ask for are things such as this. Did you have them on a performance improvement plan? Did they sign off on it? Did they recognize what would happen if they did not improve their performance? And these performance improvement plans are the proof and the documentation that you need to show that you gave employees a chance, and this is what happened. This is the time frame that we had. So I recommend performance improvement plans for employees. Again, you will have them sign off, and you will sign off to how to correct that behavior. We're not looking to fire people, right? We want to keep employees, the quality employees. Okay, but unfortunately, sometimes it is time to throw in the towel. And when is that time? It's typically when coaching is not working anymore. After numerous attempts of coaching and trying to help improve their performance, it's not working anymore. If the employee worked through the corrective action process, which we talked about earlier, verbal, written, suspension, termination, and they reached the termination level. If you did put them on a performance improvement plan, and the employee has not satisfied the requirements of that performance improvement plan, and you have terminated others for the same reason before, then we need to be consistent. Here are just some examples of terminable acts, disruptive behavior, insubordination, theft. This is typically in your corrective action policy. These are the things that we typically will terminate employees right off the bat without going through those steps. So just make sure you have those ducks in a row, have all of your performance standards are objective and applied evenly to all staff. So document all of the corrective action and the major performance conversations that you have. Make sure everything is documented and be consistent in all of your management functions. Keep going with your ongoing performance communication. Recognize that performance management is ongoing. It's not that once a year performance review. It's not that first 30 days. It is ongoing. Keep dates, periodic monitoring. If you need to put it in your calendar to make sure that you're checking on people, do that, especially in this COVID remote workforce. Be aware that goals and objectives, it's okay to change them and redirect them. If we haven't learned anything during this time, we for sure learned that in the past 6 months that goals need to change. So just some final reminders for today. Maintain those open communication channels to ensure that issues are elevated quickly. Assist, coach, redirect employees who request assistance and those who are failing to meet those standards. Coach them, work them through the process, put them on a performance improvement plan. As we look beyond COVID today, just remember that even though we're living in a COVID world, we still have workplace standards, even though they may have changed. We still want to keep those employees engaged. When employees are starting to come back, we want them confident in our business. And we want to make sure that we're ensuring a safe workplace. That really needs to be, our number one priority right now. Here are just some resources for you if you'd like to read some more about performance management and consistent management practices. And just lastly, before we get to the questions, here's just some further information. This is my email and my phone number, and Pat at the Ohio Small Business Development Center. Again, I'd like to thank her for sponsoring this today. And I'm just going to throw it back to Cody to see if we have any questions.
Yes, we have one question for you.
Okay.
What is your opinion on companies that are doing away with performance evaluations?
Okay. Well, again, I said no one likes to give them and no one likes to receive them. And sometimes I think people, companies that feel this way, they say, well, they're old fashioned or they're not necessary anymore. Unfortunately, and this could be my 20 years of HR talking, that is another piece of documentation that I think is crucial to have. So my opinion is, if you don't want some sort of 5-page elaborate performance review process, that everybody should have some form of performance review, because again, that protects the employer, protects the employee, but as a manager or a business owner, it protects you again because it gives you another form of documentation to show that you are helping to manage the performance of your employees. I hope that answered the question. And Cody, I have one, if you don't have any more, one that came over to me.
Yeah, that was the only one I had.
Okay, I have one more. It just says, if an employee is not performing during their orientation, do we have to go through the whole discipline process? And that's a good question as well. And the answer to that is, I typically will tell business owners that I'm helping to write employee handbooks for or policies for, is have in your employee handbook or in your orientation policy that at any point employees can be let go during the orientation. It's typically worded as employees in their first 90 days probationary period are not subject to progressive corrective action and can be terminated at any time. And again, usually if they're just not cutting the mustard that early on, instead of dragging that out, that's common in a handbook policy to have that. And Cody, do you have anything else that popped over?
No, nothing else.
Okay. I want to thank everybody for being on the webinar today. All of this information will be emailed to you, and it will be on the SBDC's website shortly. So thank you so much, and have a good rest of your afternoon.